Well, as Phil mentioned earlier in the broadcast, one of the points of contention between the United States and China is cybersecurity. The Obama administration claims China steals intellectual property, trade secrets, and other proprietary information. And in response, China claims the U.S. is making a false distinction between economic theft and other forms of espionage. So what happened behind closed doors? Well, here's what a senior U.S. administration official said this week. What we are concerned about is cyber-enabled, government-sponsored theft of intellectual property. The Chinese do understand what we're talking about, and it's not the same as what they're talking about. Joining us to talk more about this is Brandon Andrews, a legislative specialist at Inside America. We've seen a lot of smiles and glad handing.
Sure.
Everyone seems to be getting along well, but this seems to be one bone of contention between these two countries. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure, I do. And they took a step forward by having the first cybersecurity working group within the entire summit earlier this week. Now, as you said, there's a lot of smiles, a lot of glad handing, but one positive thing that may come out of that cybersecurity working group is a responsibility factor. So China taking responsibility for hackers that hack into U.S. systems, and the U.S. taking full responsibility for U.S. hackers or folks based in the U.S. who may hack into Chinese systems. That's a first step. There's certainly a long way to go, but something positive that's come out of this.
I had talked to a former Assistant Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, earlier this week, and he said that this is really an area where both countries can benefit if they could just come up with guidelines, because this is a problem everywhere.
Sure. It really is. And, it's a problem in the security space. So when you think about the Department of Defense, the NSA, the CIA, et cetera, but it's also a really big problem in the economic space. So you talk about supply chain, you talk about the manufacturer and sale of counterfeit parts that may have some backdoor that links back to China or somewhere else that have been sold to the U.S. And so the economic effect of not having clear guidelines in the cyberspace is really the biggest thing.
There were a lot of officials in the United States who were beating up on China, saying, they can't just say
Sure.
everybody does this. And then all of a sudden, Edward Snowden shows up,
Sure.
and then the President of the United States himself, when he's confronted with the Der Spiegel article where European allies are upset that perhaps the United States is spying on their own friends,
Sure.
he says, well, everybody does this. So it does seem as though everybody does it. I guess the distinction is what exactly is okay and what's not okay.
Yeah, and then again, when you don't have clear guidelines, you don't have a clear standard or clear rules out there, it's hard to hold anyone accountable. But I think the distinction, and you mentioned this earlier, that folks from the U.S. will say is that what Chinese corporations do perhaps goes beyond just corporate espionage or what we would see normally in between two competing companies. And I think the fact that the Chinese government is giving big dividends or giving big support to a lot of these companies. There's gray area as far as being able to track where the funding comes from, and I think that gray area makes some of this corporate espionage seem like it may be state-sponsored corporate espionage.
I talked to a former official in a previous administration who said to me that businesses try and steal secrets from one another
Sure.
all the time. It
Mm-hmm.
happens here in the United States. It happens all over the place. And he said that, if the United States was better at its game, that this is really what this is all about. The
Yeah.
United States is not up to the challenge, and that's why they're so upset about this. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, you have seen in the past few years with the establishment of U.S. Cyber Command, and then there's similar entities within a lot of U.S. government agencies and working groups, et cetera, that have been established. You've seen a real push in the United States to be able to get further on as far as cyber capability is concerned. And so, but one of the issues is that if a U.S. company suffers a cyber attack, sometimes they don't report it because of the effect on the bottom line. They don't want investors to not be, as supportive or to be wavering because of this attack. And the U.S. government needs that information from the companies to be able to continue to build the wall necessary. So it's kind of a catch-22.
I've got one final question for you. If the Snowden case hadn't happened, obviously the United States probably would have gone in a little bit more like this.
Sure.
Did that hurt their stance going into these talks?
I think it definitely, as you said, hurt the argument that China is doing something that no one else is doing it. And if you talk about the economic piece, there's a distinction to be made there, but in terms of the state-sponsored espionage, the state-sponsored cyber attacks, if you will, it definitely puts a dent in that argument.
Brandon Andrews, thank you for coming in and talking
Sure.
to us, offering
Thanks.
your analysis. Certainly appreciate it.